Now, without further ado, I'll introduce our next speaker, who I believe has a laptop to...
It's on there.
I was going to set up.
It's right behind you.
Excellent. So I'll introduce our next speaker, Mr. James Parker, who's going to present a message labelled Beyond Fear-Fueled Governments and False Gods. At a time when territory, state and federal governments compete to reject God-given principles, which have upheld Western society, the contemporary worship of the Canaanites, false gods, is swiftly on the rise across Australia. James will address ways in which we might challenge this dehumanising worship, with a call back to the life-giving worship of the one true God. James has spent over 2 decades ministering in the area of human sexuality, gender and identity. He serves alongside those recovering from childhood sexual abuse, sex and porn addiction, and is passionate about Christ's unique role at the heart of recovery. He has worked with most denominations and every level of the church, from the Vatican to the local parish. He facilitates the peer support network True Identity. Please put your hands together and welcome Mr. James Parker.
Wow. Well, just want to say I've had quite a week this week. Oh dear, anyway from the thing. Just really briefly, on Sunday I was just informed that there was a big meet in the Vatican, one of the places I used to work, where they're considering LGBTQIAP+ 2S matters and the whole idea of same-sex blessing. Surely a first in history. On Monday I attended an event in North Perth with an itinerant priest pastor whose goal was to justify homosexual practice and to see it celebrated. On Tuesday I met with more parents, yet another lot of parents, where another married woman and her mum has decided she wants to quit a marriage and to embrace lesbianism. On Wednesday, another migrant couple whose child is transitioning from male to female. Thursday was a renegade nun publicising the fact that everything LGBTQ is just fine. And on Friday, a single mum in New Zealand whose 15-year-old wants to have his genitalia cut off. And yet he has numerous comorbidities and there's no help to help him on his journey today. I want to start by saying this. You're all gorgeous. I mean, you absolutely are. And when I say that, I mean that wherever each of us are at in life, we just are. There's no judgment. So, although I work a lot with people in gender and sexuality, I don't care where you're coming from. I really don't. I just think you're gorgeous. And I mean that. But I do tell you something, though, is there are forces at work that can lure all of us away from living the fuller life that we need to be able to live. So where are we a little bit today? Well, I think we can go all the way back to where the Israelites found themselves in the 6th century before Christ, where they were interwoven with immorality. And this is reading from Jeremiah 2:23. This could be us today, guys. How can you say I'm not defiled and I've not run after the Baals, or some might call it Baals, which is false gods? See how you behaved in the valley. Consider what you've done. You are a swift she-camel running here and there, a wild donkey accustomed to the desert, sniffing the wind in her craving, in her heat, who can restrain her? Any males that pursue her need not tire themselves. At mating time, they will find her. Do not run until your feet are bare and your throat is dry, but you say, it's no use. I love foreign gods, and I must go after them. Now, many of the people I deal with today, as I say, gorgeous people just like you, people like me, people like you, if you know that song these days. They're just stuck on different apps, looking for a connection here and there. Whether it's Tinder or Bumble or Adult Matchmaker, Grindr or Affairs Down Under, it could be Flirt, it could be you laugh, these are real things. We're not going to examine your phones before you leave, just you're all right, don't worry. But I want to be honest with you, it's okay for us to sit here in the Irish club, and I'm loving the Kilkenny on tap, yeah. But there's a lot of people, for them, this is where they're at, and they're being pulled to and fro. And they too, like us, they want to live life to the full. But for the most part, they're blinded. It's not too unlike Deuteronomy 29, verse 18. The Israelites were told this: make sure there is no man or woman, no clan or tribe or any group among you today whose heart turns away from the Lord our God to go and worship the gods of those nations. Make sure there is no root among you that produces such bitter poison. Now you've got to laugh, because only in Australia do we use the word root for you know what. And let's be honest, as gorgeous and wonderful and as godly as the sexual act is, and sex is great because God made it, and actually you wouldn't be here if it didn't take place, let's be honest. Some of you younger ones, well, that's a bit of a question with IVF, but I know that's something on it. But anyway, but all I can say is this is that where the root is not in the right place, literally and colloquially, it can produce, in cases, bitter poison. Just can. So that brings me on just to the 5 main points of what I want to talk to you about tonight. Very, very simply. I want to talk, well, they're the points. So let's move on with them. So point number 1 is just to mention a little bit just about the fact that I run this peer support network here across WA that reaches out a bit further afield. We look at assisting people with sexuality, gender identity and purity, and offer support to people around porn and sex addictions, matters to do with sexuality, childhood sexual abuse, gender dysphoria, and just support to families and friends as well. There's not much out there, and as I said to you, we have no judgment on anyone. We just say, come along and let's give you the opportunity to ask questions that otherwise people aren't asking. And let's be honest, there's a lot of our friends out there that should have asked a lot more questions of what was going into their arms and their bodies during the time of COVID. Yeah? See how people fall into different traps. This brings me rapidly on to point number 2. Well, what does it mean to be human? Well, let me show you a couple of pictures. I think you recognise these. It's not the latest model of an iPhone or a Samsung, but you can tell the difference out. On the left is the iPhone, on the right is the Samsung. But if I said to you, oh mate, can you lend me a phone charger? He goes, yeah, here you go. If you know your phones, that ain't gonna work. And if I got a Samsung, you go, yeah mate, here you go. That ain't gonna work. Because what's happened is this, is we might have certain phrases, but if you are not absolutely clear on what you're engaging in, and your communication isn't clear, you say, can you lend me, a charger for my phone? Well, you're likely to end up with the wrong charger. Why do I say this to you? Because if we're not careful, we've lost sight of what it even means to be human today. We've got to go back to the Creator's design. Whether you like Apple or not, if you don't follow what Apple say, your merch isn't going to work. Genesis 1:27 talks about the fact that we were created in the image and likeness of God, an image given uniquely to man who is willed by God for his own sake. I've dealt with a number of young people the last couple of years who wanted to transition. They've been ready to dive into the gender clinics. And when we've said to them, we want to make sure you're fully informed before you make this decision. We don't tell people what to do, but we help them to become fully informed. In every single case, not one of them, not one has gone ahead for cross-sex hormones or any form of gender or bodily mutilation. Thanks be to God. Because they've been informed. Because we start with the right premise. We don't force that onto people, but that's our vision and that's our goal. Walking alongside people and meeting them where they are. Now, the book of Genesis has been the bedrock for millennia. Male and female, he created them. Now, we're also aware that in Matthew 19, verse 12, there's a bit of variety out there as well. So some people are eunuchs from the womb, some are eunuchs because they've, by human agency, it says in some of the translations of the Bible, and some are eunuchs by choice. In other words, some people choose celibacy. Some people aren't fertile, it's the way they are. But the most important thing is that God's way is critical. And that's why I put the word worship into this third little section of ours tonight. I just want to read you just a few little scriptures here. First of all, we're created to worship. John 4:23 said, the Father is seeking those who will worship him in spirit and truth. Psalm 16 verse 2, I say to the Lord, you are my Lord, I have no good apart from you. Aside from God, we have nothing good. And the fall and that separation from God, who is all good, is what we're paying the price for today. And the graphs we've just seen, and the four horsemen, and everything else. Even back in the Old Testament, it says in Chronicles 16:29, 1 Chronicles 16:29, worship the Lord in the splendor of holiness. So this brings us then, whoops-a-daisy, let's go back again, because we're going to talk about prophets and false gods. Now, whether or not you're a Bible reading person or not, there's a couple of great passages in something called the Old Testament. And one is from Numbers 25, and basically said it because death comes through the worship of Baal and of Ashtoreth. And Baal basically is a false god. Yeah. Baal is, the easiest way to describe Baal is basically male genitalia. As crude as it sounds, that's what it is. Now, I've got a teenager, and I hear about the pigs that are flying through schools and colleges and everything else around our city. There's a lot of Baal worship going on. There just is. This isn't about judging, no judging. But then Baal is mentioned 63 times as the Lord and the possessor. Ashtoreth is another false god that the Canaanites had. And that basically is worshipping everything around sex and fertility. And I know that Court is going to speak a little bit about the war, a lot of, actually on the war of our children. But really, these are the two main gods of sexual orgy. Now remember, God's going, yeah, sex, great, I made it. But when it's put in the wrong context, we start seeing our society begin to fragment. And people start losing the sharpness of who they are. And then they stop making the right decisions. In 1 Kings chapter 18, great, awesome chapter, we're basically presented with three types of prophets, holy men if you like. We've got the good, the great, and the ghastly. The good are the 100 guys who go hiding inside a cave every now and then, hiding away. I think to some extent today that's not too unlike many of our good church leaders who really don't want to absolutely speak up in times of need. It's not that they're not good people. It's not they don't believe and they don't have a real heart for their people, but they don't want to offend anybody. I don't want to be dangerous. Which gospel do you read is what I say, anyway. Then, of course, you've got the ghastly prophets, which is 450 prophets of Baal, who absolutely believe that they've got it all right. Now, I'd say that some of those are in some of our fringe churches, but also I'd say that our politicians are also those ghastly prophets who absolutely think that they understand and believe everything about the human person and what we need. But it only took one man called Elijah, who was great. And he turned around and he challenged these 450 prophets. He basically said, right, you take a bull, I'll take a bull. Cut it in half, and you ask your God to burn up that bull as a sacrifice, first of all. Well, what did? They hobbled and they danced and they cried and they cut their skin and, oh my goodness, what didn't they do? Nothing happened. But Elijah turned around because he got everything in order. He actually went to another step, another degree, and he said, pour 12 jars of water over that bullock and dig a big trench around it. Now, there was a massive drought there, so he was taking the finest water, whatever, it had been expensive for water. They poured it all over, and he just said, God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Israel, God's chosen, God's special people. Bring it on, basically. And everything got consumed. We need to remember that there's others who've gone ahead of us, and our voice may seem like one small voice. And I'm not out here to proselytize you tonight. I'm saying, if you stand for something, stand for it. And stand strong for it, and don't be afraid to speak up and to speak out. I brought a box of matches with me, but I'm not going to light it. I want you to imagine that this room is absolutely pitch black. You can't see anything, dark as can be. And then whoosh, I light a match, and it goes out. None of you will then be able to deny there's such a thing as light. Even if it's only for the briefest second, you're like, whoa, we've only ever known darkness. There is something called light. There is something called truth, and we have to pursue that with all of our hearts. Otherwise, we're like the fellas, the blokes in Matthew 13, verse 13, where Jesus said, seeing, they don't see. And hearing, well, they claim to hear, but they can't hear. They don't understand. Their hearts have grown dull. Their ears are heavy of hearing. Their eyes have been closed, unless they should open their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn from me to heal them. It's not too unlike Romans chapter 1:24. It says, God abandoned the Romans to their filthy practices. They exchanged God's truth for a lie, worshipping a creature rather than the Creator. And how quick we are, and our young people are, to worship the creature rather than the Creator. So, where there's sexual license, I would say, particularly sexual license without repentance, in some way we have chaos in our legal system. And therefore we have to have abortion up to birth. We have to have euthanasia. And round the corner it will be euthanasia for teenagers who struggle with the amount of spots they've got on their face and their back. I kid you not. Then there's the whole issue, and I'm sorry to talk about it, but incest. And if any of you have been anywhere near hardcore porn, you'll know that incest is a popular theme on there today. The next popular theme, of course, the two most popular words apparently typed into porn search engines is, one is the word teen, teenager, and the other one is the word boy. And of course we're moving from the word paedophile to the word MAP, which is minor attracted person, but we're moving towards AAM, which is the adult attracted minor. So the emphasis is on the child to choose what they want to choose. I think the court might tell you a little bit more about this later. Comprehensive sexual education, so-called safe schools, drag queen story hour, the gender fairy, gender queer, which is in every one of our city libraries, mostly for download by teenagers, which is basically porn. Something I call transgenderism, rather than transgenderism, which is just the demolishing of male and female. And this is the subtlety of when we don't stand up and we move in the other direction. Basically, we're seeing a fair amount of hypocrisy that's going on. The true imagination is exchanged for introspection. Put another way from Romans 1, the glory of the immortal God is exchanged for an imitation. And we start worshipping and serving the creature rather than the Creator. So we have the phrase, my body, my choice, which to some extent is a sacrifice to Moloch, versus the vaccine mandates, where if you say it's my body, my choice, what are you called? Terrorist, wacky, nutty and dangerous, drop kick. No jab, no job. Oh, but you weren't forced. You know what I'm talking about. No one forced you. I know this is a bit contentious, but then we have the voice versus a cry this week, and I don't care who the cry is from, but to have a Royal Commission into looking at childhood sexual abuse in the indigenous communities, and where $40 billion of the taxpayers' money is going every year. Now we call dinosaurs dickheads, racist or dumb, if you don't want to just bow down and kowtow to our fear-fueled governments, whatever your aspect may be on the voice. If we're not careful, we're falling into new gods, as it says in 1 Timothy 6:10, the love of money is the root of all evils. We've got to be on the guard against the yeast of the Pharisees. Now, the Pharisees were the church leaders, but I'd also say of our political leaders today and their hypocrisy, because we are seeing an incredible rise in serious mental health issues in our youth. We are seeing the greatest rise of what we might call non-heterosexual students ever, with 25 to 30% of students suddenly trying all sorts of variants of things and often getting stuck in these places. Basically, if we're not careful, we're letting our young people be sacrificed to the Baals and to Ashtaroth, as happened many years ago. So we've got to call back to true worship, as it says there. We've got to open the user's manual like you would with your iPhone or your Samsung. But in this case, it means we've got to open the word that created us and spoke to us into being. We are fearfully and wonderfully made from our mother's wombs. It says in Isaiah 64 verse 7 that you are our Father, we are the clay. So yeah, you are the potter, we are the clay, the work of your hands. So we come back to the sacred scriptures. We come back to the Ten Commandments, to the Beatitudes, to the Acts of the Apostles, to Paul, where we see stories of transformed lives rather than the stories of ruined lives. And it's bizarre that, in the last 20 years, and thank you, Gideon, for your presentation, because in some way it brought us up to scratch that things really are heating up. In the last 20 years, since the start of the 21st century, it's like we ignore the fact that God could be God. And we seem to think that, God's folly and weakness is somehow even lesser than our wisdom and strength. And our wisdom and strength is nothing, still dust compared to his folly and weakness. So, how do we move out of all this mess? Well, we choose life. We have to move, guys, more and more with our conviction rather than just dwelling on opinions. I want to say that again because it's really important. Act on your convictions and don't just spend your time wasted on opinions. The German poet Heinrich Heine once asked why men no longer built cathedrals, and he said, well, people in those old times had convictions. Now this is near the year 1800, so he's talking like even before then. People had convictions. He said, we moderns only have opinions. It needs more than a mere opinion to erect a Gothic cathedral. And there's a picture of Cologne Cathedral. It took 632 years to complete. Wow. Does modern man have the necessary conviction to build something like this today? Now, we may not be building physical things like this today, but we have to be aware of what in a religious term, the soul of our humanity is all about, whether you're a religious person or not. The dignity of what it means to be alive and to respect each other as well on this journey. I just want to mention just three little areas. Let's just come up in a completely different font. Doesn't that always happen? Anyway. Some of you read The Road Less Travelled by Scott Peck. Great book. But it's got 4 key sections. I just want to mention those 4 key sections. In there, Peck talks about discipline. He talks about the fact that life is difficult and we've all got problems. Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, tell our young people. So it's better to suffer short-term pain now and to accept responsibility and to keep choosing truth over comfort if people want to grow. That's why I'm encouraged to be here with you tonight as peacemakers, because you want to make a stand. Then he talks about the fact that love needs to be our goal or our aim. And love is an action, not just a feeling. Basically, I extend myself for my own or another's growth. But it's never about, oh, look at me, look at me, look at me, Catherine King. He talks about being religious or having beliefs. He says that religion and science are in tandem to strengthen each other. So we've got to act like scientists when we constantly need to question and test our worldview, to inform our opinions, and to make sure that we have convictions. And we're to reject anybody who tries to impose us from having those opinions and convictions. And the last point he says is grace. He says basically it's something that lies outside of our traditional senses. Many would say God provides us with the means to grow, what we might, and to, in a sense, just move beyond what we just naturally feel and think to a different place. That moves us on to the narrow gate. In Deuteronomy chapter 30 it says we've got to choose life. I present you with life and death. Choose life. Choose it. Well done to all of you here for choosing life. Matthew 7 talks about entering by the narrow gate, Jesus said, since the road that leads to destruction is wide and spacious and many take it. Then there's something called the Benedict option, which I'm sure some of you've heard about. A book written recently by Rod Dreher. That talks about running to the hills and building your own community. Well, maybe externally we might need to do that. But the very place we have to take this option is we've got to build a sense of quiet within ourselves. Seriously, to take the time to reflect and to be very careful about what is being presented around us so we don't fall into the trap of the wide gate as others have done as well. We basically are to decrease and he is to increase.
That's right.
Hope in times of fear, my last slide, penultimate slide, I apologise. Where do we find hope in times of fear? I am a survivor of extensive childhood sexual abuse. I was raped on a number of occasions at the age of 16, 17, 18. My life was pure trauma and a mess. But what happened is, in the midst of my fear and my brokenness, I found hope. And I found hope at the cross. With all of its triumphs and its ugliness and its victories, its bloodiness, and the greatest riches, where the unrepentant are in some way distinguished from true penitents. You've got what we call the good thief and the bad thief. One said, I don't want to know. The other guy was never too late to turn on and say, I want to live a full life and a better life. The cross is the doorway to him who is that word, the word that reveals to us the way, exposes the truth, what it really is. And then we live a fuller life, not just down here, but up there too. So my final phrase is Ephesians 3:20-21. It says, glory be to him, to Jesus Christ, whose power working in us can do infinitely more than we could ever ask or imagine. Glory be to him in the church and from generation to generation. So I just want to say thank you to Court and to others who've organised tonight. Thank you to the Irish Club. I feel a little bit closer to home here tonight. Thank you very much indeed.
That was a wonderful message. Now, we've got in the schedule, we've got a 15-minute break, so buy yourself a drink, enjoy some communion with your friends, and come back